maybe do it after. Hello, we've got Major General retired Charlie Herbert back again, my old pal. How are you?
Nickel, I'm very well indeed. It's lovely to be invited back. I think
Uh,
third time together, isn't it? We haven't spoken for a little while, so I'm looking forward to it.
No, this again about a year since the last one. So it's good to have you back. We texted the other day and you proposed it, and I thought, why not? It's always nice to get a recap of what's going on in the world. See if we can make sense of everything that's going on, if that is indeed possible.
God, good luck with that one. I don't think anybody can do that, can they?
No. All right, I'm going to read you an article. This is from Der Spiegel. I read this morning. So this came in this morning. Very early this morning. So this is from Der Spiegel in Germany. Der Spiegel, I'm not going to do it in a German accent.
I don't.
Obtain notes from a confidential December the 1st call where top EU leaders demanded Ukraine ignore the Trump administration's fast-moving peace talks. Germany's Chancellor Merz warned that Americans, in quotes, are playing games. Macron called the potential US deal a great danger. Finland's Stubb, that must be their prime minister, said, we must not leave Ukraine alone with these guys. And NATO's Rutte, how do you pronounce his name? Mark Rutte.
Yeah, Rutte, isn't it?
Yeah, from Holland. He urged, we have to protect Vladimir. So, what do you make of that?
Yeah, good old European posturing. We're always late to the party, aren't we, in Europe? We used to say that America was late to the party in the First World War and the Second World War, but it appears that it's Europe that's late to the party when it comes to kind of a war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. And I don't know, EU just seem politically incapable of consensus and coming up with a sort of coherent plan, whether that is to support and defend Ukraine or whether that is a coherent plan to bring about some kind of peace in Ukraine. So they always seem to be sort of reacting to something put out by Trump, who seems always to be on the front foot, whether that is on Israel, whether that is on Venezuela, whether that is on Russia and Ukraine. You can't fault Trump in that regard. He's on the front foot. He's not reactive. He's there. Whereas Europe just seems perpetually on the back foot, doesn't it, Nickel?
Sure.
I worry a little bit, Nickel, about those that say, we just got to blindly crack on with this war in Ukraine and we just got to blindly support Ukraine and, let this slog on for another 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Ultimately, Nickel, there's going to be a political agreement, isn't there? We know that. We just know that. And in many regards, the quicker we can get to that, might be distasteful, but the quicker we can get to some form of political agreement, the sooner we can bring about peace in Ukraine, then it's got to be the better for everybody, I guess, hasn't it?
Yeah. And, you're a general. I was considerably lower down the ranks than you were. But when I had 3-star General, number 2 NATO General Richard Sharef on here, and I proposed my solution, that was what I proposed back then, with the hubris that comes with being a retired guy. And what's basically being proposed right now is what I said 2 years ago. Was it 22? Yeah. 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago now. Knowing full well that was going to be the eventual outcome. And, it seems a bit odd that 2 years ago, when Boris Johnson went across and scuppered the peace plan that was agreed, and the Ukrainians negotiating team were popping champagne corks because they thought it was all done. And then Boris Johnson turns up to allegedly scupper the deal. And had it been done at that time, the Ukrainian would have been in a much stronger position. So a year or 2 more years worth of bloodshed and for a loss, which makes me think that this is being dragged on for some unknown reason.
Well, I mean, who gets rich out of these wars? The military-industrial complex, most of which is in the United States, Nickel. It's basically in any hurry. And it's basically, the shareholders of some of the largest defense companies in the world are in any kind of particular hurry to bring this war to an end. They all get rich on this. That's it has ever been thus. And
Mhm.
you're right, conflict will always have people that are quite happy to cheerlead it. Yeah, you're right. I think Trump has made this point to Zelensky, hasn't he? Is that if you torpedo this deal, well, if you torpedo a deal in the short term, things are only going to get worse for you. It's
Mhm.
interesting. I was kind of trying to understand the amount of ground that Russia has taken. It hasn't taken. It is a grinding war of attrition, isn't it? And it has been for a couple of years now. And there's been no sort of decisive change, I think, in sort of ground holding or ground taken certainly over the last 12 months. But Russia is gaining ground. I mean, that is a fact. It is gaining ground. It is hemorrhaging manpower, but Putin doesn't seem to care. It's got a population of 130 million, so it can keep grinding away with its manpower. Ukraine's only got a population of what, I think 30 million. It can't continue, purely from a mathematical manpower perspective with a grinding war of attrition indefinitely. It just can't. It simply cannot. So the sooner that Ukraine can find some kind of a solution, or both can find a solution, then the better. But it's got to be a good peace, Nickel. I'm not into this idea that we just force peace upon the Ukrainians, that we just completely abandon them and we reward Ukraine. Oh, sorry, we reward Putin with success. Because I think you and I just said this a year ago. If you do that, you send a very dangerous message to China that actually, any action that they take against Taiwan may also be tolerated in the same way. So there's a sort of bit of geostrategic deterrence involved in this as to how we bring this war to an end. And we mustn't just roll over and let Putin have what he wants. It would just be fundamentally wrong, man.
Mm. What do you think? What What's your view on the fact that the Eu- the European Union, the EU, has been effectively shut out of the negotiations? That it's directly between Ukraine, well, Putin, Zelensky, and Trump's guys at the minute. So that seems very strange. Why do you think that is?
I just think this is the current administration. I mean, it's not really after a multilateral solution, is it? It wants a bilateral at best trilateral. So, bilateral US Russia, at best trilateral US Russia Ukraine in the room. I don't think they're particularly interested. I think Trump is very contemptuous of the European Union, both as a collection of individual states, but also as a collective, as a European Union bloc. I think he's fairly dismissive and contemptuous of the EU. And I don't think the EU's necessarily helped itself. As I said, it's dragged its heels on Ukraine. It's been
Mm.
slow to help both fund, but particularly to arm Ukraine. And it has been heavily reliant on America to do that, certainly during the first year, 2 years of the war. And I think, we know what Trump's views on that one, his thoughts on burden sharing. And we know Trump's views on Europe within NATO. And you only got to look. You take the EU out of this. Just look at the UK, Nickel. Is the UK really pulling its weight within NATO at the moment? I'm not sure it really is. What are we sitting at? 2.5% of GDP. Germany's well above that now. Poland's masses above that. We're no longer one of the what I would describe as the significant players within NATO. We're still, of course, we're a significant player with hugely capable military force, and we're still a nuclear power. But it'd be hard to say that we are investing sufficiently in our defence capability at a time when other nations, and particularly the United States, are. So we're probably increasingly seen as a fairly unreliable partner by the US as well, I imagine.
Mm. Yeah, they haven't played this very well. And did you have you read the original, the draft peace plan? It's very
No,
interesting.
not this year. You know me. You're not talking about 2025.
Yeah, the latest one. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
the one,
yeah.
because one of the I'm not sure if that particular line is still in there, but it was that one of the conditions for any sort of peace was that Zelensky has to go, or rather, not that he has to go, that they have to have an election, because right now he's not legitimate. And whether you agree with that or not is kind of not really the point. But one of their sticking points is that they have to have an election and let the people decide what they want to do, and not have in their view, an unelected president making the decisions. I don't know if that's still going on, but that'd be very interesting. And I'm not sure how much of a, I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much popular support Zelensky genuinely kind of has in Ukraine. Probably quite a lot, I imagine.
Do you think so?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I've not been to Ukraine, and I've not kind
Neither
of
have I.
widely discussed it with Ukrainians. Yeah, I think he's done an incredible job, to be honest, Nick, or you may not. I think he's done an incredible job. I think there's no great harm in what he's done in delaying elections. I think Zelensky would happily fall on his own sword, if he thought it would bring about peace and a just peace, the right peace that the Ukrainians want. I think he would do that. I don't think he seeks to cling on to power for his own personal self-interest. I think he's personally, yeah, call me naive, I think he's genuinely clinging on to power for the best interests of Ukraine. But no, you're right. There comes a point where he will have to fall on his sword and keep harking back to things like Northern Ireland. And it took huge political leadership on both sides of the divide. I know, it really did. SDLP, DUP, UUP, etc. Real leadership, and many of them sacrificed, I think, their long-term political careers in order to bring about the Good Friday Agreement. And yeah, Zelensky's going to have to kind of do this at some point, probably.
Mm, yeah. What do you? The reason I'm skeptical, Charlie, and I'm not a contrarian, just kind of reading all these different sources from around the world, see what the views are from different countries outside of the West, that is. And when you see his right hand man, his number two, being investigated for corruption, this is all these things. There's never any coincidences in this in politics, is there? So the peace talks begin. They're saying no, we're not going to deal with these, and then suddenly this the Anti-Corruption Bureau in Ukraine turns around and says, okay, we're investigating this number two. We're investigating over $100 million worth of missing funds. And then he takes asylum in Israel. And then his number three is now under investigation for, I think, a larger sum. And, there's a lot of money going into Ukraine, a very corrupt country, as we know. And they have almost zero accountability as to what's happening with that money. That's why I'm skeptical as to whether he's on the up and up.
Sounds like the UK during COVID, Nickel. I know. we always have to
that's a very good point.
We've always got to be a little bit cautious, Nickel, about throwing stones and apportioning some of these sort of accusations of blame. Yeah, I mean, find me a country that's at war but isn't corrupt. War creates power vacuums which are quickly filled, and you look at the levels of corruption and stuff that was going on in the Balkans during the 1990s, during the civil wars there. Look at the level of corruption that was going on in the Afghan government during the Afghan campaign from 2001 to 2020. Huge levels of corruption. Yeah, so I'm not saying that Ukraine is perfect. I'm not sure that I necessarily think that there's some sort of great conspiracy here going on. I mean, what would you rather? How would you kind of see this changing? Would you like elections in Ukraine?
Me?
And yeah, and how? I mean, I could see my own naivety a referendum in Ukraine. Kind of says, where do we want to go? Do we want to kind of go on fighting? Do we want to attempt to restore our territorial integrity and accept this extraordinary sacrifice in blood and treasure? Or do we accept a shitty deal and give up those disputed territories, give up the Crimea, et cetera, et cetera? You can see a kind of a scope where there's a referendum rather, I think, than an election. But you're right, Zelensky can't cling on forever. Otherwise, he will completely lose legitimacy in the eyes of the international community.
Yeah. Were you in Iraq in 2005?
I was.
We were there together, right?
Yeah. 2 tours, a battalion tour, and then I went back later in the year with B Company.
Yeah. So I remember I was at the HQ in Basra at the airport in the MND Southeast. Yeah, that's what it was, wasn't it? SE. And I was there the evening when they were, forklifting in pallets of dollar bills. I mean, there was one pallet which had my friend, he was doing the escort for it. It's $15 million on that pallet. We're just looking at it like,
wow.
And I read about this the other day. It was over 560 million, over 500 million anyway, in cash was put out or distributed in Iraq when we were there, because we were there for the elections. Remember, we were there for the surge,
Yep.
first elections they'd had.
Yeah.
And that was, do you know what that money was for? You'll
Go
know.
on.
Well, it was just to all the greasing palms and making sure that the ballot boxes and things weren't getting stolen and the voting booths weren't getting blown up. But there was a lot of graft going on there. That was just pure hard cash
Funny, I
getting
mean, it's funny you
doled out.
remember. I don't ever remember handing out money. I remember handing out pistols. I remember being given a large stash of nice pistols. I forget what they were, Sig Sauers or Glocks.
Yeah, Swiss.
And with limited accountability, but we were to gift these to people who we thought needed personal protection down on the Alport Peninsula. So I just kind of remember to sort of driving around, meeting local dignitaries. Say, would you like a pistol? You know? And I'm not even sure that they had to sign a 1033 or anything. I think we just gifted them a pistol, and I'm not quite sure that's necessarily the best way of fueling a conflict to give people pistols.
Did they have the serial numbers sanded off?
I don't even think they did, Nickel. And yeah,
Just-
I don't even have one on the wall in the study, which is real sad. I should have really decommissioned one and brought one home as a war trophy, but didn't happen.
I proposed to my friend, so he was leading the convoy, the security convoy for this pallet, and I said, "Look, the Iranian border is not very far from where we are right now. Let's just take the money and make a break for it.
Isn't there a
Set up
movie?
a new life.
Isn't there
A
a
new
movie?
life.
Wasn't there a movie about this? Was it Three Kings? It was set in
Three
the First
Kings.
Gulf War, wasn't it? About almost exactly that, wasn't it?
I thought it was a pretty good idea. I think it was come up with a very solid
Maybe
estimate.
that explains, Nickel, why you're sitting in the Alps,
It's Switzerland.
leading a life of luxury.
No, I wouldn't quite go that far. But it's funny what things are going to start going through your head. Alex Holdroy Smith, I don't know if you remember him, he was the Scots Guards guy. I did a estimate, came up with a plan. Probably one of my finest.
I'm not sure. Would Iran? You could quite easily have crossed the border into Iran.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'd
Just
have
wonder what would
retained.
have happened
I'm
when
not
I
sure
got
you'd
to
have-
Iran,
I'm
though.
not sure you'd have retained the money and would be living in luxury. A
No,
luxury
I think I'd
seafront
probably be in
villa in
jail.
Khorasan or something.
Yeah, so that was just goes back when you think there's a lot of shady business goes on at these conflicts, but it was just seeing that much money in one pile.
Well, there's lots of shady business going on, doesn't there? It's good, interesting, changing track slightly. Trump's announcement a couple of weeks ago that he's authorized covert action in Venezuela. And you think, there's a lot of shady activity. I'm not quite sure how you can announce covert action. By its very nature, I thought covert action was supposed to be covert. But I like the idea that he'd announced it. But no, you're right, shady action. Everything's going on through warfare. Nickel.
But what? Yeah, sorry.
Go on.
Oh yeah, that was. Well, I guess we can talk about Venezuela, but we'll go back to Ukraine later. We'll probably end up having to wrap this all up into one anyway. But the Venezuela thing's quite fascinating, and what I'm reading in the press, trying to understand what's going on. Why is he being so belligerent towards Venezuela? People are going to say, they have the largest oil reserves in the world, more than Saudi, and it's just right there. It's just the other side of the Gulf of America or Gulf of Mexico, or maybe even Gulf of Venezuela. But it's very close. They probably want to get their hands on that. But he's got a big bee in his bonnet about Maduro. What's your take on it?
He's had a bee in his bonnet about Maduro for a long time. I think Trump's been talking about Maduro, hasn't he, in Venezuela since 2017, and the illegitimacy, in his view, of Maduro. And I think it's since about 2020. I think the US have had an arrest warrant out on Maduro, haven't they, since 2020? And I think they had a bounty of 25 million for a long, long time. And I understand that's gone up to about 50 million. So they've put Maduro now onto the same sort of status as we had bin Laden after 9/11, which is quite extraordinary. Yeah, he's got a bee in his bonnet about Maduro. He clearly doesn't like it. It's funny. I wasn't watching this at all. Yeah, it's part of it's a region I don't really know particularly well, South America. And then I started to take notice when the US Navy started to strike, what they claimed were narcotic traffickers in international waters. And I commented on social media about, I'm not quite sure where the legitimacy here is. What is the legal? Could somebody please tell me what the legal basis is for these strikes? And I really struggled for a long time to understand what the legal basis was for the extrajudicial killing of a alleged narcotic trafficker in international waters, using standard international law. And of course, what's apparent, and I've only just kind of realized this, is that the US is striking them under the laws of armed conflict. So they are treating Venezuela, and they're treating the narcotics trade that's coming out of Venezuela as a threat, an active threat, almost like a military threat to the United States. And on that basis, they put forward this argument that these strikes are legal. Just really kind of odd to me. I mean, can you imagine if we were kind of, whacking traffickers across the Caribbean? If we were doing if the Royal Navy was doing this kind of stuff, we arrest them, we interdict them. Our Royal Navy do in the Caribbean under standard law enforcement laws, and nobody would fault those. Absolutely nobody would fault that. But this idea of drone strikes and missile strikes and extrajudicial killings we should all be really uncomfortable about this, Nicol, because it starts here.
Yeah.
Where does it end? Where does this end?
Yeah, I have to agree. It's the optics. I mean, there's people dying first and foremost, and I'm sure they're not the drug. They're definitely not the drug kingpins driving these fast boats. It's going to be the usual average Joe. That first and foremost, but secondly, the justification being that they're trafficking fentanyl and cocaine, and it's killing. Well, the fentanyl does kill, I think, 100,000 people a year in America. So I suppose they could justify it using that, but at the same time,
the fentanyl comes from Mexico, of course, not Mississippi. Trump says it's a fentanyl threat we're defeating. Go deal with Mexico, not Venezuela. Yeah. Venezuela is not fentanyl, is my understanding. Small quantities.
Well, that's it. I've done a bit of a deep dive, on the internet. I'm just having a look around to see what's
Chat GPT research. That's what we all do.
No, I don't do that. I don't do that. No. I always get terrible answers from it. You have to correct them. If they're so intelligent, how come they're getting corrected by, of all people, me? And I have to show them my sources, and they go, "Oh yeah, you're right. Sorry, we got that wrong."
Because their sources are based upon the public, and no, you're right. Yeah. That's why there are some kind of crazy ideas out there.
But what I've been gleaning, I suppose you could say, is he's been. So there is a back and forth between Trump and Maduro about his effectively leave. What do you call it when you not abdication? That's a king. What's the word I'm looking for? To resign his presidency.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things on. I mean, it was like the peace plan. A lot of points, and one of them was he wanted full. Oh man, what's that word? Amnesty for him and his colleagues. So, and he wanted to keep $200 million to himself, which is, probably a little bit more than you need as a socialist. And then the other thing comes out is, so that's happening this has been happening this week, late last week and this week. What are the terms and conditions for him to leave? I don't know if you've read any of this. It's pretty fascinating stuff. What he's trying to, and will go to some safe haven and live out his days, like Idi Amin or whatever. And then his top general security top guy came out because he got arrested and he's in jail in New York right now, and he's obviously trying to do a deal here, saying that when Trump was going on in 2020 about the election fraud, that the Dominion, the Smartmatic machine, these computers they're using instead of paper ballots, come from Venezuela. And this general comes out and says that there absolutely were, there was shenanigans going on. I don't want to go into any details because I didn't really get that far into it, exactly what was going on. The process, he says, was definitely there. And that was another little revelation that popped out the other day. Have you heard any of this?
No, I haven't. I love you, Nickel. You love a good
You
conspiracy.
see?
I should come to you on a weekly basis to what are the conspiracies that are out
Find out
there?
what's going on.
I know.
I,
But you're
well,
right.
that
I
was
used to. I think
that
I've
one
said this
there
to you before.
before.
I
The
used to
one,
be
sorry,
really
just yeah. I was
no,
just
go
going
on.
to say my previous source was Der Spiegel. The other one I think was the Washington Post or New York Post or one of these major national papers. It's not me making stuff
No,
up.
I know, I
I
know. And
promise. I promise.
I used to be really skeptical of some of these what I described as conspiracy theories, but in reality, you hear them a few
They
times,
keep
and then a
coming
year or
true.
two later, you realise that they weren't conspiracies at all; they're
Mm,
absolute facts. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, you've got to give Maduro an off ramp if you want him to go. Yeah, I don't see the US launching a carrier strike group,
No.
military intervention. I don't even think MAGA are interested in that
No.
kind of military intervention into Venezuela. I don't think there's any support for Trump, and I don't think it's Trump's style. But he'll ramp up the pressure on Maduro to such an extent. But I mean, he's got to provide him a safe haven. It's probably in Russia. Next door to Assad. In a nice dacha on the outskirts of Moscow. They can hang out together. But yeah, he's probably got to be allowed to take some money with him, and you've certainly got to have a guarantee. He's got to have a guarantee. But those arrest warrants are going to be ripped up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's not going to go. But if we want him to go, and I think it's probably not a bad thing that Maduro goes. Bad stuff is going on in Venezuela and has been going on in Venezuela for a long time, particularly under Maduro. Bad
Mm,
stuff. And you only have to look at the number of people that have left the country. I mean, it's millions, isn't it, Nickel? Millions have left that country to get away from failed economic policies and an authoritarian dictatorial regime. So it's not like this is some kind of lovely benevolent regime that Trump's got it in for. It's not at all. And whether or not we believe it is a narco state, I don't know. But my understanding is it raises as much money out of narcotics, levies, and taxes, mainly through stuff coming through Venezuela. The money that it raises through that equals the money that it receives in terms of oil sales.
yeah.
Nickel. It's stratospheric, the amount of money. So you could say that is, it may not technically be a narco state, but it's not far off it. And that's not a kind of good place. But I'm not suggesting that, some kind of unlawful intervention, covert action by the CIA is the right way to do. And whatever I think America does, it's got to be within international law.
Hmm.
He says glibly and hopefully.
Like
Have you seen
Iraq 2 and
no
Iraq
application
1.
of international law in the last 25 years?
Exactly.
But one would like to think that it was done, within international law.
Maybe we've turned a corner, Charlie. Maybe we're a new leaf in international relations. No illegal.
2026, Nickel, ever the optimist. I love you,
Yes.
buddy.
I doubt it's going to happen anytime soon.
It's
But
getting worse. It's getting worse, isn't it? Not better.
it's crazy, isn't it, when you think about how much money is coming through drugs? And this is one thing. Now, I think we talked about this before about army captains being the most cynical people on the earth because they've got over the excitement and enthusiasm of being a young lieutenant having a great time. And then when you get into the captain role, it's sort of, I guess, lower middle management, and you start to see how the sausage is made, and you become, maybe this is not the job for me after all, despite how much I love it. But what the good thing about when you go to Sandhurst in the officer school in UK is, analysis, have to take in all these factors, and I find it very. I'm struggling to believe that you've got these different cartels in South America and Mexico and Colombia. I'm sure they're in Venezuela as well. In fact, that's got to be a certainty. That the powers that be, the real power brokers of the world, are going to let a bunch of, country boys in Sinaloa be making tens of billions of dollars a year in trafficking and not want either to their cut or to take it over. And I'd imagine the same goes for Colombia, Pablo Escobar. You're not just going to let that guy's making way too much money that a lot of greedy people around the world that want to get their mitts on it. And you wonder if the same things happen in Venezuela. And, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting.
You're the rational one here.
I never really started thinking extensively about the narcotics industry sector in the context of Afghanistan, in 2007, in particular when we were expanding the US footprint down in southern Afghanistan, and there are a lot of efforts to eradicate the thing. The first thing that struck me about narcotics is it's a displacement activity. In the 1970s and 80s, I think considerable work was done to eradicate drugs from the Golden Triangle, that sort of Bangkok, Laos, Myanmar area. And what happened? You just displaced it. We got rid of it in the Golden Triangle, but it just displaced. But the industry didn't decline. The supply and the demand for drugs didn't change. It just moved. And it moved to Afghanistan. And now the Taliban, I understand, have been relatively successful in banning the production of opium and heroin. So it just displaces, and the drugs just displace. And, a few years ago, we were quite successful, I think, in reducing it in Colombia, but it just moves. It just kind of moves. So the problem is, we could chase the supply of drugs and try and deal with it. Or actually, you deal with a wider problem, Nickel, which is the demand. And you address the question of demand. And the demand is in the United States, and it's in Europe, and it tends to be in the more affluent parts of the West. And actually, we probably could deal with this issue if we were to devote enough money, into our welfare state in order to address the problems of drug demand. But it just seems to be easier and cheaper and more fun to go after the suppliers, doesn't it? And you're absolutely right. I think in the context of Venezuela, Nickel, it's not just about the drugs. It's not, absolutely not. Yeah,
No.
it is about Venezuela as a source of raw minerals, materials, oil, all the rest of that. Yeah, as you say, it's potentially a very, very wealthy country.
Yeah. So I saw Maduro was making, well, he organized, apparently have 4.5 million militiamen armed and ready to defend the country. You cannot imagine, one could not imagine anyone, because Venezuela is a pretty big place and it's jungle. That sounds, you're not going to go in there with a land attack. You're not going to put in an force in there, are you? That's going to be
Well,
absolute.
If you looked at the disparity in budget, I mean, I think Venezuelan defense budget is $4 billion a year. I think America's over 800 billion. But it's easier to be glib about that, isn't it? What was the Taliban defense budget? Not very much, but
Not
it
very
still
much.
brought NATO. It still brought NATO to its knees. So one doesn't need a big budget. No, I don't know. Trump never ceased to despise me, but it's difficult to envisage a meaningful military intervention to depose Maduro. But I stand poised to be proved wrong, Nickel. Yeah.
I just honestly, couldn't wrap my head around it. That what are you doing? You can have a couple of a carrier group down there, and they can have missiles they can launch in the States to get there. It's not that far away. But
I heard somebody say the other day, you don't send the USS Gerald Ford, I think the largest aircraft carrier, you don't send 30% of the US Navy's deployed assets to Venezuela unless you intend to use them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I subscribe to that. The very presence of them in itself has a coercive, persuasive effect upon Maduro. It doesn't mean that, the US has already has a predetermined plan to physically use those military assets. They're using them there just by having them in the region. It's interesting. I suspect they just kind of ramp up the pressure, but it'll be interesting. Be interesting to see what kind of happens. But what's interesting is, sort of Trump's kind of all over the place, isn't he? Gaza, Ukraine, now South America is of an interest to him. Seems to have taken his eye off sort of China Pacific, doesn't he? Which is really where for the last decade, people have been saying the US strategic interest really is. But when you're sending carrier groups out of Europe and to South America, it suggests that you're not that interested in those areas.
Well, are Venezuela not a major supplier of oil to China?
Good question. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't
probably.
know.
Yeah, it looks like
Yeah, I
Putin
mean,
and
there'll be huge, right, huge Chinese investment in Venezuela, let's face it.
yeah.
Yeah, there's bound to be.
Do you know, while we're on South America, this is an interesting one about the Panama Canal. That was a thing that Trump did pretty much day one. That, because the Chinese were buying the ports on either side, and they said, right, we're taking that back right now because you're not never supposed to do that. That is a major strategic, well, point canal. What this all ties together. It has to, right? If you're going to be getting oil out of Venezuela, you got to go through the Panama Canal.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly nobody would necessarily want China to solely control access through the Panama Canal. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody would. The EU wouldn't necessarily want that. Certainly, the United States wouldn't. So I suppose there's a degree of insurance about that move. By the same token, nobody would necessarily want the United States to control all access into and through the Panama Canal. That would be equally concerning, I think.
Yeah, it's a funny one. What about going back? We'll go back slightly to Ukraine here for a second, because one of the things that happened, which for me certainly raised the eyebrows, was when they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, the second one. I believe the first Nord Stream one's still running. Is that right?
Don't know. I really don't know. Now, I know you're very focused on Nord Stream. It's not an area I've really got to look at that.
Well, I'm not that
Or an issue. Well, I've heard you talk
Genuinely.
about it before.
Ah, right, yeah. Just because it's it was very when they try to blame
Yeah,
Russia straight off. I
awfully
was like,
interesting one.
come on. But why? This is, and it's like you said, you don't want to be it's not conspiratorial. I don't even think that. You're just looking at the facts as they're coming, and what it's done. What the Germans have done is shoot themselves economically in the foot, majorly, because their energy, and Britain energy prices, they've shut down their oil industry almost, and they have the most expensive energy in the world. But Germany, their largest industry is the automotive industry, and they've relied on cheap Russian gas to keep the lights on and remain competitive. And they're tanking. These companies are tanking hard. If the Germans are, what sounds like what Merz is doing is trying to, rattle the saber against Russia, while your economy is going down the toilet. See, this is where I start to. But what is the end game
These
here?
are the tough political choices that states have to make, aren't they? They always have done. I mean, what's the alternative, Nickel? Buy your cheap Russian gas, fuel Russian success in Ukraine, and in a decade, find that you've got Russia, scratching on the borders of Poland and traditional Western Europe, which would not be in anybody's interest. So I suppose maybe there's a degree of realpolitik about it. You have to accept that there's an economic impact on Germany with what they're doing, in order to try to prevent a more advantageous position for Russia, in a decade or 2 decades or whatever. I don't know. These are really tough political decisions. But, but they don't gain votes, of course. It's probably not doing anybody any favors politically in Germany, that.
Well, tanking your economy is not a vote winner.
No, it's not a good thing to do. It doesn't make you popular either. As most British governments find out.
Well, that's a different podcast. I'd try to find someone who, because I'm quite insulated, but of course a lot of people come across. In fact, my best friend from home is across at the moment visiting me and talking about the UK, and it's a tough place to be right now, I think.
I don't know how long you've been out of the UK, but
18 years.
Maybe it's partly we get old and we get more critical and we get more skeptical of the place that we grew up in, but it just doesn't feel like the country that it once was. But that's, I'm not a reformer. I'm not a reform voter. I'm definitely not.
No.
Maybe it's on immigration, but we just seem incapable of sorting out our infrastructure. 4G, 5G networks appalling in the UK. The roads seem to be appalling. A major construction task seems to take 5 years. HS2 seems to take 30 years. Meanwhile, the Chinese can put in 5,000 kilometers of high-speed rail in half the time. So there's
Yeah.
something kind of definitely fundamentally wrong with the UK at the moment. Yeah.
Did you see the new maglev train that China has come out with?
No, is it cool?
1,000 kilometers an hour it can
Wow.
do.
That's
Yeah.
mental. That's completely.
It's faster than a jet plane,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a commercial jetliner.
Wow. Are you
It's,
serious? It's like 700 miles an hour.
yeah,
In the sound.
yeah.
Wow.
In some
Wait a minute.
maglev. I hope it wasn't AI. I hope I wasn't getting spam, but I don't think it was. I checked it out. It seemed to be
I
good.
gotta
You got to
check
check it out, Charlie.
I'm
Fact
gonna
check
check
me.
it out myself. I'll be sure to tell you if I think you've been spammed.
Fact check me. But it was a collage of different infrastructure projects going on in the world outside the West. In the Saudis are building the highest. It will be. It's higher than the Burj Khalifa. That's what it's called. Yeah, the one that's like a kilometer tall. I've been at the top of that, the restaurant. It's weird looking down.
Can imagine.
Tell you that. Yeah, but it's going to be taller. They've got this thing, what's it called? That big the line, is it called?
Yeah,
That thing's
line,
insane. And just all these different infrastructure projects going on outside of the West. These enormous civil engineering projects. We're getting left behind.
Yeah, I mean, meanwhile in Oxford, we're trying to replace a railway bridge over the Botley Road, which meant that Botley Road has been closed for about 3 years. One of the main arteries. It's insane. I don't understand what's happened to this once great country.
Well, bad government. I will put it that. Let's. We're straying into curmudgeonly old men territory here. So let's stay on. We'll go back.
We passed that line a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's probably. Well, it's true, isn't it? I mean, Jesus, it's a catastrophe. These trains. I was back in Scotland in summer. Not that the trains aren't fine. It's just they're so bloody slow.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. Anyway,
doesn't seem to have changed in our lifetime. I remember
it's got worse.
Trains coming in and traveling at 100+ miles an hour. It doesn't seem to have gone any better in the last 20 years. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is shot forward in terms of advancement. Hey ho, let's not moan about it.
No. All right. What should have been talked about a while ago, but we'll get onto it now. Is what do you make of this ceasefire in Gaza? Ceasefire in air quotes.
I was thinking about it over breakfast this morning. I want to be positive, but I'd love to say something positive to you about it. And I suppose the positive is that fewer Palestinians are being killed on a daily basis. But that's relative. It's just fewer. It's not a peace plan, is it? There was never a peace plan put forward. The US have forced upon the Palestinians a solution that is highly disadvantageous to the Palestinians, but isn't going to bring about any kind of long-term political outcome, is not going to bring about a better peace in Gaza, is going to, in my view, just freeze this conflict, and freeze this conflict in such a way that the Israelis probably continue to occupy about 50% of Gaza. It's a farce, Nickel. It's an absolute farce, to be quite honest. And as I say, the only thing that's optimistic about it is fewer women and children are being killed by the Israeli Defense Forces every day. But still a lot are being killed every day, and not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, of course.
I'm not sure. What is this getting coverage in UK media? That the ceasefire is being broken all the time, every day.
It slipped off the headlines, if I'm being quite honest. It never gets as much headlines as Prince Andrew or other hugely important geostrategic issues like that, Nickel. But yeah, no, it's fallen off, and certainly continued strikes against Palestinians. So the Israelis claimed the other day that they killed 2 Hamas suspects who were approaching their positions in Gaza. And they put a press release out. We eliminated the 2 suspects. Actually, it turns out these 2 suspects were 8 years old and 11 years old. They were children, Nickel. And you cannot tell me they didn't know that they were killing children. I mean, that place is so heavily surveyed. They would have known exactly who they were killing. And they continue to kill with impunity in Gaza. Does it get headlines in the UK? No, not really. Not really. Not on the BBC. I mean, the BBC vaguely covered it on a social media post, I think. But they're quite happy to let most of this go totally and utterly unreported. Um, it's pretty abhorrent in my view. I think the media have played a very significant mainstream media played a really irresponsible role in this conflict. There are one or two exceptions. I think what we've seen, to my mind, Nick, or my kind of reflection on this in the media, is mainstream media have shot themselves in the foot. They've increasingly made themselves less relevant. I suspect they've lost an awful lot of readership and an awful lot of viewers because people are turning to alternate sources of news and information. And I just don't buy into this bullshit that people say, well, the beauty of the BBC is all the information is verified. It's really important that you get verified and accurate information. Utter bullshit. If I
Yeah.
want accurate information, I'll go to social media now. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some people who are equally, but I'm afraid the BBC's bias has been so horrendous during. I mean, tell me to get off the fence, but his bias has just been so horrendous. It's totally discredited.
I see a lot of criticism of the BBC for being too pro-Palestine.
Yeah, no,
Have you? I guess they are walking a tightrope here. It's a very polarizing subject. I my stance is always, I just want to be. I'm on the side of people not getting killed on
good.
both sides. The average Joe and Josephine are out there. They're the one, and their kids are paying the price. It's not. It's not
Yeah,
Netanyahu. It's not these
I
guys.
agree. I'm on the side of ethics and values and standards and legality. And if we kind of go back to the whole point about this, there was we've discussed this, but there was a chance after 7th of October, Nick, there was always going to be some form of military action. There would always be some form of punitive action to attrit Hamas. I've never had any problem with that. It needed to be done. And I'm definitely not an apologist or a supporter of Hamas. Absolutely not. What happened on the 7th of October was appalling. But what I think the IDF have done over the following 2 years is just strategically illiterate. To be quite honest, it's not going to bring about a better peace with the Palestinians. It's not going to bring about a long-term political solution. I think it has made Israel a pariah state. I think it has effectively raised the whole issue, raised awareness of this issue of Palestinian statehood to a young global audience, but were not necessarily alive to the issue before the 7th of October. I mean, Israelis have done this themselves. They've properly shot themselves in the foot. And along the way, they have, in my view, unlawfully killed tens of thousands of innocent people. And they justify that on the basis of the 7th of October. And I don't see how you can do that. I don't see how you can. Two wrongs don't make a right, in anybody's book. Yeah.
Remember last time we talked about, and I was questioning the narrative about the 7th, the narrative of about 7th of October. And sometimes when it's late at night and everyone's in bed, I'll have a little discussion with various AI LLMs, and ended up talking, typing and reading, not talking, but with a robot, of course, and went through. It probably took at least an hour of going back and forth and checking and getting the model to check various different things. And so this is AI, not me. Conclusion was that there were just too many things that were coincidental about what happened that day for it not to be something extremely fishy about the whole thing. And what's the Latin phrase, cui bono? Is that right? Who benefits? I'm still, it's such a tricky one, but I don't think when you find out that Mossad have got guys inside the Iranian government, and they can put pagers in people's, back pockets that blow up. And you realize that this is an operation. These people are very good at what they do. God, man, it's quite astonishing that what what they're capable of. And
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in many regards. How is
yeah,
it that they had so completely penetrated Hezbollah in Lebanon and so completely penetrated the IRGC in Iran, yet had such an incomplete intelligence picture on Hamas, literally in their southern border? I agree with you. It's and if there's not a kind of conspiracy here, then deeply inept,
mm,
deeply inept. And I do, to a certain extent, think that part of the violence which the IDF has enacted on Gaza is a result of the way in which they were embarrassed, so publicly embarrassed and humiliated on the 7th of October. And I think they were. I personally believe it was a huge intelligence and security failure. I
hmm
don't think they knew. That's just my personal belief. It's a massive intelligence failure, huge complacency. And I think, when people are so humiliated like that, then their natural response is to lash out and do violence upon those people that have done it. And that is what I think the IDF have done. And Netanyahu all the way down. Netanyahu's intelligence services, cabinet ministers, the MOD, the IDF themselves. Um, but yeah, I know I can understand the optics there, Nickel. How is it that they didn't see
yeah,
this coming?
yeah,
I know,
the most
and
surveilled
it's
piece of land in the
as a
world.
red flag operation as such. It's kind of convenient. It has allowed them. It's certainly allowed certain people in the Israeli government, Smotrich, Ben Gvir, Netanyahu, to do stuff which they would probably have long aspired to do politically, but never had the
Mm,
justification to do. And 7th of October did provide them with that justification. So there's something in what you say.
yeah. So I was chatting with a 19-year-old English kid, young adult last night. And he was telling me, him and his friends, they don't watch the BBC or Sky. They don't watch I don't think they watch any terrestrial TV, the traditional
Mm.
channels in the UK. They are, like you said, vehemently anti what's going on over there and talking about burning bridges with everyone. Now, the average Israeli person is going to get blowback for this, and it's not there. It's not there. There's people out there having mass protests across there against it as well. But there is a real backlash amongst the youth, which would never happen. Well, up until basically 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you'd never have seen that coming.
No, I mean,
And
I was in Kefalonia this summer and all over the island, you saw graffiti, "Fuck Israel, free Palestine." I mean, it was really interesting, and it was across the island, and this was endemic in Greece and in many other parts
wow,
of the world. No, you're right. They have made themselves a pariah nation by their own doing, by a campaign that has been so lacking in distinction and proportionality, by some of the comments that have come out of the Israeli cabinet that are so contemptuous of the Palestinian people,
mm,
murderous, so awful. Is it any wonder? And but in nowhere again, people will say, yeah, but Charlie, what about Hamas? Hamas, for God's sake, is a freaking terrorist organization. We expect them to come out with those kind of things. We expect the 7th of October. Yeah, I don't have to criticize them. It goes without saying.
mm,
In Israel, it's supposed to be a democratically elected government that is an ally of the United Kingdom and the US. And we provide very considerable support to Israel, both militarily, diplomatically, politically. I do expect better things, therefore, of the Israeli government. And it's not wrong that I criticize them and uphold them and hold them to account to a higher level than I would do. And that's not, and that's not the bit that's really angered me over the last 2 years is, any criticism of the Israeli government, holding them to that, it just brings about a claim of anti-Semitism,
mm.
which is just so utterly nonsensical and so anti-Semitic in itself. But we've all had that charge leveled us at one stage at one time or another over the last 2 years.
Yeah. What's been your personal blowback? You've been an outspoken critic of this whole thing since the start. One of the few.
I
I see
mean,
you get
no,
attacked quite often. I
yeah,
see you
yeah,
get
yeah, yeah,
attacked
but
often.
on social media, just it amuses me.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's quite funny. Yeah, I mean, I think you probably saw in 2024 the Telegraph went after me.
Yeah.
A journalist dragged up a non-story from 2017 where I got into trouble in Afghanistan for sharing a bottle of champagne with my team. A complete non-story. But that made like page 7, a half-page spread. General sent home in disgrace from Afghanistan. And they published that 7 years after the event, and everybody's scratching their heads going, I didn't know we had a general in Afghanistan. And then they read the story and, this was 7 years ago. So everybody
Yeah.
knew this was just a smear campaign. It was a punishment beating from a Telegraph. So there's a little bit of kind of personal blowback, but I'm not a big figure. Where I think it's been really difficult is where they've gone after public figures, genuinely public figures. Whether they are pop stars or whether they are Hollywood actors and actresses, whether they are authors, any kind of public figure who the moment they speak out against some of these IDF's actions, they get this massive pylon and they seek to bury their career, absolutely seek to break these. And that blowback's really wrong. I don't care. I mean, I'm not really a public figure. I'm just a retired baby general, Nickel, who just gobs off a little bit on social media and talks to the media where I can do. But yeah, I did an interview the other day, actually, Nickel, with Middle East Eye. And they talked a lot about moral courage. And they said, why is it that you have the moral courage and others don't? And it's not about moral courage. It's got nothing. I absolutely adamant. There's no moral courage here. It's just about doing what's right and saying what I see and using my little Twitter platform where I can to point that out. What's interesting is that little Twitter platform has kind of reduced in size. If you're right wing, pro-Israel, Nickel, then your followership has probably doubled or trebled by speaking out in favor of Israel and knocking the leftists like Charlie. If you speak out against Israel, then the algorithms have truly work against you now. And you were saying to me recently that I don't see you anymore on X. What's happened? I just
I
don't
haven't
see
seen
you.
you for ages.
No, nobody does. The algorithms make sure anything I post doesn't get seen by those people who follow me. Still, I mean, still stuff gets out there. Yeah, I put a post out the other day, but I know maybe got about 10,000 likes or something. So it does get seen. But those people who used to follow my rantings don't see it. Yeah, what do they call it? Shadow ban or whatever you call it.
Shadow
It's
ban.
me
Yeah, you
algorithms.
just
They
get
work. They
strangled.
work against you. Just
Yeah.
work against you. But hey, it does. Who cares?
Going back to what I was talking about yesterday with this young fella, I was actually surprised by how well informed he was in the all war. It hadn't even crossed my mind that this would be something that this particular guy would be have any interest in or not. It's just this thing is happening. For most people, it's just it's just such a horrible concept. They don't really want it. It's just, forget it. This is disgusting. The whole thing's bad. And war is bad, like obvious thing to say. But what he said was that they are vehemently anti-Israel now. Not anti-Israelis, but the government of Israel. And the knowledge of what was going on, what he knew what was going on, his depth of knowledge, actually really surprised me. And we see there's certainly a campaign. They're trying to rehabilitate their image amongst the youth because they're aware of the fact that this is happening, and buying TikTok, buying these various different social media platforms to strangle the information. But you forget you got Telegram, and a lot of information comes through Telegram, which might come as a surprise to folk our age, but not when you're young. This is a different era we're in right now, and that's going to be a lot of hard work. One could foresee it being a lot of hard work.
No.
I'm not saying me personally. I'm just saying it's going to be to rehabilitate their image after this, and especially I've got Israeli friends, people who served in IDF, things like that, and what about these guys? Would they? It's a very tricky situation they've been put into.
Yeah, it is. No, it is. I mean, and if you've taken a poll of all those young people in mid-October 2023, They probably wouldn't have known very much about Israel and the Palestine issue.
Really?
But I think they would all almost unanimously have been extremely sympathetic
Hmm.
towards Israel in mid-October after what happened on the 7th of October. So how is it, Nickel, that 2 years later, those young people are now much, much better informed about the Palestinian issue and are very, very critical of Israel to the extent that you say? I mean, why is that? And Israel needs to do a little bit of self-reflection here as to what's gone on and what we and they say, "Oh, we've got the narrative wrong." And I'm sorry, that's bullshit. It's not the narrative you've got wrong. Just stop killing innocent women and children in Gaza. That's
Yeah.
what you've got wrong. It's not the narrative. You know, it's not the strategic communications. It's the actions. It's the deeds that you've got wrong. You know, you've been disproportionate and indistinct in your campaign, and that's why these young people are kind of angry. And you can't put that right quickly. You cannot put that right. I mean, in my view, Nickel, and you may disagree with me, Israel right now holds the same sort of status and reputation as South Africa did towards the end of the apartheid era. It was a pariah state, but was isolated from the rest of the world. I mean, the difference for Israel is it still has US and a lot of European support, but otherwise it's isolated from the rest of the world. It is, in my view, an apartheid state. It is a pariah state. And you can't just change people's perspective. It's not about running a glossy PR campaign with Saatchi and Saatchi. It's about changing everything that you do. And that means fundamentally changing the Israeli approach to the Palestinian issue. And that means, to my mind, you know, making some progress on a two-state solution or biting the bullet and going for a proper one-state solution, but undermines much of what Israel stands for.
Mm.
But they've got to address this issue of Palestinian state, or if they ever wish to restore their reputation, Nickel. It is as simple as that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, are we,
How do we get here? How did they get there in the first place? It's just,
I don't know. I've changed my view. You know, they didn't get here as a result of the 7th of October.
yeah,
Just,
it's been,
as I say, we can't. There's a danger that we view this as a 2-year conflict. It's not. It's an 80-year confrontation, and it's an 80-year. But arguably, it's longer than that. But it's a confrontation ultimately about who owns the land, who has a
mm,
right to that land, and how you accommodate two very different people who both have legitimate, claims to that land. But when you take a sort of colonialist approach and just say, okay, it's Israel and it's Israel only, and screw the Palestinians, that's not going to work in the Middle East. It's not. So you've got to come up with something, not necessarily that's fair and equal, but something which is politically acceptable to
yeah.
all of the parties, to all of the stakeholders, in a play. And I do honestly, Nickel, I think the Palestinians have been treated appallingly since 1948. I really do. 5 million of them exiled from Israel. 5 million refugees still with no right to return. And it's hugely complicated, but in a certain extent, it's not complicated. It's really simple. Address the issue of Palestinian statehood.
Hmm.
Sorry to bang on about it, but
No, no, I
where I lean
agree.
on this.
Something has to be done. And, destroying and rebuilding and getting rid of them is not a solution because that's
Well,
just, you know what? We have to study military history. We had to, and I still do a little bit every now and again. And not just military history, history itself. And we know how this ends. It doesn't end well. These things, it's never, the balance of power is always shifting. And when it does shift the other way, it's gonna end badly. It seems to me very short-sighted, if you ask me. If
yeah,
in
yeah.
my opinion.
I totally agree. And this is what I've always sort of said about this conflict in Gaza is it's not going to bring about a better peace.
No.
It just guarantees another generation of conflict, and that's really heartbreaking. More innocent Israeli men, women, and children are going to die in the future, Nickel, and more innocent Palestinian men, women, and children are going to die in the future. And what we'd love to see is an end to this 80 years of perpetual violence, a cycle of conflict. I think what everybody would like to see is a solution to that that brings about some form of peace. It'll be imperfect, and it's the same in Ukraine and Russia. Nobody wants to see just a perpetual conflict. It's not in anybody's interest.
No.
So closer that people can think. But in my view, military action is really decisive, Nickel. Yeah, I know it was in the Second World War, kind of Falklands War, but more often than not, Military action, is a useful instrument when conducted in parallel with diplomatic and economical and political and all of the other kind of instruments of power. With a view to bringing about some kind of political solution, some kind of political agreement. But we seem to forget the lessons of that a lot at the moment.
Yeah. Just one final point is we were just talking about speaking to this young guy yesterday, and I double check. I said, "Is this just you, or is this It's like it's everyone, because he's a different school, and then he's hanging out with different other school friends and various different friend groups, and they're all saying the same thing. And what was astonished me, and that's what I was trying to remember before I couldn't remember, is they understand the history, like going back to the Balfour Declaration after World War One, and they knew all about this stuff. I was astonished, because they're not being taught that at school. Do they teach that history in school? I have no idea.
No, I
But
doubt it.
I didn't get taught that at school. We learned that after. And it's just, yeah, the truth will out, as they say.
It's encouraging. It's encouraging, isn't it, Nicola, when you meet a 19-year-old who is politically open like that?
Yeah.
But as long as they're open-minded, and what worries me is that young people, and this is, I spoke about mainstream media and non-traditional media, social media, and the beauty of social media, but there is a problem with it. So when Charlie Kirk was killed, Charlie Kirk,
Yeah.
Trump, I was surprised at how many young people I know and deal with knew about Charlie Kirk. I'd personally never heard of him, never heard of Charlie Kirk until he was killed. But I was struck that a couple of kids I know at an independent school knew who Charlie Kirk was. My son, who's 16 and not remotely political, knew who Charlie Kirk was. And some children that I work with from very disadvantaged backgrounds also knew who Charlie Kirk was. And the common theme for all of them is that they got their information about Charlie Kirk from right-wing social media, very right-wing social media. And that slightly worries me. Great that they're aware politically, but if all they're getting is either far-right propaganda or far-left propaganda, then we've kind of got a problem, because what you really want is them to get both so that they can make up their own mind and come to a balanced judgment about their own political views. And there is a kind of slight way, but it's not like mainstream media give them anything better.
No.
Because if you only read the Telegraph, you're going to turn into a right-wing tosser, quite frankly. You need a bit of balance in your life.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah, absolutely. And I've always, again, this is something else. It's always baffled me. I don't understand. Is that, well, we are the Telegraph. We're right wing. We're the Times. We're a little bit right wing, but a little bit left wing. Somewhere in the middle, maybe. And then you got the Guardian, we're left wing. And why does an opinion? Why does a newspaper need to have a political leaning? Why don't you just tell the news for what it is?
It's a great question, and there's a naivety about us. Yeah, because of course the Independent set itself up, didn't it? Whatever it was, 20 years ago.
Yeah,
as being genuinely political, but it's got a circulation of probably about 12 people nowadays. I don't even know if the Independent, it is still going, and it's very good. I mean, I don't think it's as independent as it claims to be.
No.
But no, you're right. It is a shame that mainstream media is as politically biased as it is. And you've got to be quite clear what you're reading, and question what you read. I'm very disappointed. I grew up with a Telegraph in my house. My father read the Telegraph his whole life. And I thought the Telegraph was the beacon of, goodness and truth and honesty and, no bias. And I wouldn't wipe my bum with the paper nowadays, Nickel, to be quite honest.
Yeah, they went after you. Good crossword.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some good people who work for Telegraph. I still help some of them, with stories. But as a editorial policy, I think it's an appalling. It's just a rag. It's just a posh version of the Daily Mail, isn't it?
Propaganda. It's propaganda, pure propaganda. And once you see it, this is my outlook on world now. We can finish on this, or you can respond to it. But my outlook is that it's all propaganda. It's all bullshit. And once you realize that, your life becomes actually quite good. Instead of getting angry and despairing and depressed, once you just realize it's all nonsense, mean, the subject's going on. You know, these horrible things are happening. Don't get me wrong. I'm not blissfully unaware of that, but it doesn't affect me anymore. You know, in fact, I
No,
just
but
assume straight away that it's nonsense, bullshit, and I just get on with it. There's no point
yeah,
arguing with anyone
it's
because there's
really
two
true. And
opinions.
but you're curious about the world around you, and
Yeah,
you say you'll set up late, whether that's on social media or on an AI platform or just reading whatever, because you're curious around the world around you, and that's great. And especially with danger, Nicholas, the amount of information out there is
yeah, exactly.
huge now. 24/7 news cycle that just pumps this stuff out relentlessly. You can't escape from it, which is a good thing, but I suspect it's also quite a bad thing. I hark back to the good old days when I was 13 or 14 during the Falklands War. I got my news at 9 o'clock or at 10 o'clock. That was how we heard what the war was. And then in the morning when the telegraph popped through the news, the letterbox. Now it's all pervasive. You can't escape from it, which is good and bad, I think.
It's great going on. We used to go away on exercise for like 4 weeks. Even a weekend when you haven't got a phone, you haven't got any phone reception, a weekend in the woods, you don't miss it. Then first thing you turn your phone on and then you get all these messages and then
Remember the good old days, Nick? I mean,
sucked
it
in.
would have been in your time.
Yeah.
Well, the only news we got was you had a little transistor radio, and you tuned into BBC World Service. I remember sitting in the deserts, sitting in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, waiting for the Gulf War to start, the groundwater starts. That was how I knew what was happening with diplomatic negotiations and whether or not we were going to get a war. Same again in the jungles of Belize and places like that. Yeah, that was the only way we could get our news. It wasn't a bad little world, was it? Ignorance is bliss sometimes.
Yeah, that's brought back some memories. You used to get the weather forecast. The shipping forecast used to give you the weather because it was, especially in the UK when the weather's shit. But anyway,
get phone out.
Yeah, Charlie, great to chat to you, pal. We've covered an awful lot today. I think, as far as I'm concerned, it seems that there's a lot of shenanigans going on right now. But my position is always going to be on the side of humanity, and I want to see peaceful solutions to everything. No, wishful thinking, I understand.
No,
but
you're a good man, Nickel. That's exactly how it should be. And but keep questioning what you read.
Yeah, absolutely. So social media. You're on X, Charlie Herbert. No, what are you? I forgot your handle.
Charlie 533080.
On X.
Knows my old regimental number.
Yeah, well, I figured that one out. But great pleasure, and we'll do this again next year, same time next year, pre-Christmas.
Really nice to talk to you, Nickel. Have a great Christmas and a good New Year.
And to you also.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.